Good morning, everyone. Happy Sabbath. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to tell stories one more time, so we've come together, both my wife and I. I hope you're finding the stories exciting. However, I don't know to say that they're exciting. I've told them so often they're not that exciting to me, but surely, hopefully, they are interesting at least to you. So let's begin with a word of prayer, and again, welcome to our limited approach to Sabbath school today. Heavenly Father, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for those who are hearing, listening to the stories we're about to tell. We just ask that you would enhance the stories as we give them and make the lessons valuable to all who hear. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. This morning I'd like to tell you a story that happened to me a long time ago. I had been working in the mines. As you know, I quit the mines. I went to work. I went to school in a little missionary training school, a self-supporting school like Eden Valley. We were there 2 years as students. And then the third year, my wife and I were asked to go to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, is a city on the border of Sault, Michigan. And there was a health food store that my wife and I were to run. And we did for 1 year. Well, while just before us, there was another family there, and they had taken the other family back to the institution and asked us to run this little health food store. And we were living on the property of a man called Mr. King, who owned a nice house over here, and he had another house which we had leased a year earlier. So anyway, here we are. We ran this health food store for a year, living in Mr. King's house. And here came the spring of the year, and pretty soon Mr. King was at the door. And he was saying to us, your lease is almost up. It'll be up next month. And if you want to remain here, well, then you need to sign the lease. And we kind of told Mr. King with a lot of confidence, no, we will be moving further into the forest because what we believe is that we ought to live in the country and not be so close to the city. Where we were at Mr. King's place was on top of a hill overlooking the whole city of Sault Ste. Marie. In the evening, it was a wonderful picture. We could see the whole city, all of these lights, and we could pray for everyone there. And it was great. But we felt for sure we needed to move further away from the city, especially since our children were not going to school. And we were homeschooling, and it was against the law in Canada in those days to be homeschooling. And so if we were caught homeschooling, there was always the danger that we might lose our children. They would take them away from us because we were nasty enough to homeschool them. Well, every now and again, every day practically, the school bus will go by the house, stop and pick up some children. And my wife was very afraid of this because we couldn't allow our children to be playing outside at that time when the school bus might see that we had children there not going to school. That would have been terrible. And so it was always nerve-wracking. It was stressful to be living too close to the city at that time. So we told Mr. King, no way, we're not signing any lease, we'll be moving on. He says, well, that's fine, you got another month. And in a month from now, you will have to decide to sign the lease or to move on. Fine, no problem, we're going to move on because the Spirit of Prophecy says we should be living in the country. And so a month later came along, Mr. King was there, and we had not found a place yet. So we asked him if he would extend this thing for another month while we were looking for a place to live in the forest, further away from the city. And we began looking. Every evening after work, we'd jump into our car and we would drive east and we would drive west and we would drive north. We couldn't drive south because that's where the United States was. In any case, we were driving in every direction but south to find a place in the forest, in the countryside where we could rent a place where we could live. We could not find anything for rent anywhere. That was amazing. So running a health food store, I made a placard, you understand, and I wrote looking for a house to rent, and I posted it there in the store so that everyone who'd come in would see it, and if they knew of a place, they could tell us about this place. And people would come in all the time and they would ask, well, did you find a place yet? And I would say, no, we haven't found a place yet, but never mind, God doesn't want us to live in the city, He wants us to live in the country. Therefore, He will find us a place. I am not the least bit worried. I have a lot of faith in what God will support His own word, you understand. And another month went by. And we hadn't found a place. And Mr. King was at the door. Mr. King, please give us another month. Surely we will find a place. And we looked and we looked and we looked. We entertained moving into a barn or a shed, anything to get away from the city. We were not going to sign no lease. No way. And so here we went looking and we never found a place. It was terrible. I don't know if we extended this thing only 2 months or 3 months, whatever it was. It was longer than Mr. King liked it for sure, but he was generous, he was kind, he was gracious. He allowed us to stay and stay and stay, but it's getting tight. It's getting, About this time, now this is August of the year, and Woodland Park Foundation, the institution from where we came, we're having a convention, and they called us in Sault Ste. Marie, which is 300 miles away. And they called us and they said, can Janet come and help us to organize the convention and, you know, all the things that need to be done. So my wife took the children and drove. One day, Mr. King comes into the health food store and he was, you could tell he had purpose in his step. He came to me face to face and he said, listen, I am going to the lawyer now. And I am going to write up a contract, and in half an hour from now or an hour, whatever it is, I'll be back. You will sign that paper or you will leave that house. And he left. Can you imagine how I was feeling? I mean, Lord, you promised in your word, in your spirit of prophecy, you promised that we could live, that we should live in the country. We're willing to live in the country, and you should be opening where we could live in the country. It only makes sense. I have faith in you to do this. Now I've got half an hour. What are we going to do? Lord, this is a horrible thing. And if Mr. King comes back, I will be forced to sign a contract because I have not found a place to live. Half an hour later, Mr. King came back. He put the contract on the desk in front of me, the counter, and he gave me a pen. And he said, sign right there or leave. What could I do? I didn't want to pick up that pen. I didn't know what to do, and my heart is crying out to the Lord. Lord, you've failed me. Oh, man. Anyway, and there's another part to this story. There was a lady, I talked about this lady before, Uncle Johnny, and what's her name? Anna Chervinsky. Yes, Anna Chervinsky. They were good friends of ours, and they had a property in the country, and they had 2 houses in this property. The problem is the other house was leased already, and they had been trying for months to get the family to break the lease so that we could come in. And they worked at it, and they worked at it, and the other party was just wouldn't let it go. They would not break the lease. And anyway, so came that day, I signed the lease, and I'm going to be in this place for another year. About a half hour after Mr. King leaves, and I have signed the lease, in walks in Anna Chervinsky and Uncle Johnny, and they are dancing. They are so happy that the other people have agreed to break the lease. They're going to move out so we can move in. And I said, you're half an hour too late. I have just signed the lease. And Anna Chervinsky went like this, and she made a 380-degree circle, and she said, you are so stupid. She turned around and marched out the door and slammed the door. And how do you think I felt? It was terrible. It was terrible, you know. Missed it by half an hour. Well, that wasn't the worst of it. No, after the day was over, I went home, and I'm in a house all by myself, and my wife is off 300 miles away, and it's dark, and I feel bad, and I don't know what to do, and the phone rings. And who's on the phone? My wife. And she said, how are things going? And I said, well, not very good. What do you mean, not very good? I signed the lease today. She began to bawl at the other end. She's crying and crying and crying and crying. And I'm the bad guy. And I don't remember the words she said. It probably wasn't very good. Anyway, I have ruined everything. Anyway, we got off the phone eventually, and I went upstairs into a little bedroom. I knelt beside the bed with my Bible, and now I am not sure there is a God. I know what I believe because I read it in the Spirit of Prophecy, I read it in the Bible, but God failed me. To meet our needs, He wants us to live in the country, but He didn't open the way. What am I supposed to do? Is God real? Is the Bible real? What am I going to do? I had a terrible time praying and crying to the Lord. But by the time the evening was over, I tried to trust Him that there was something I didn't know about all that was going on, that He had an answer to all of these problems. And so I just left it with Him, feeling as miserable as you can feel. You understand? Understand. Way to, because there was a convention going on, we had I was the president of the foundation, a missionary training school. You see, God knew we were not going back to that place. And the people who went back to run the health food store were the ones who had first leased the property. They loved Mr. King and they loved the property, and they were going back to live in a property that they loved. God was not going to get rid of it under them, and He was not going to give us another place in the country so as to force this other family to live in the barn we were going to live in, whatever it was. No, God has it all under control, and I was never meant to be there at all. Can you see how God works? That's how it is. Now we'll invite the other half, and I'm sure it's going to be exciting.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, you know, it's hard to dig up some of these thoughts in your mind that happened long ago. But I found a little newsletter that I had written with a few stories in it, so it'll help me. And so this is a story about cries in the night. When I was in Lupalilo, before we had moved to our property in Mago, we had all our workers lived with me in the same big house that I rented. And so one night we were all in bed. There was Barasa and his wife, and they have 2 kids, and then I had my room, and then our sewing teacher, one of our carpentry teachers came during the day, but we had Bible workers staying with us as well. And so the rooms were all full. And one night around 10 o'clock at night, we're all in bed sleeping, and there's this baby crying. And then it stops, and it starts up again a little while later, and it stops. And the third time this happened, Miriam and Barasa, one of my Bible workers, and his wife, heard these cries. So they took their flashlights and went out, and there on the porch was a baby and a little boy. The little boy was 5 years old, and the baby was 2.5. And so they came running back in. They woke me up and they said, Mama, Mama, there's a kid sleeping on our porch and there's a baby. And so what should we do? I said, well, I jumped up and we went out there and picked up those kids and brought them in the house and wrapped them in blankets because it had rained that day. We're above 7,000 feet of elevation, and it's cold at night, and especially if it rains, and so then it's damp, and so this baby had only a shirt on. It didn't have anything below because it's easier to train a kid that way and a lot less laundry. And so just to wrap these kids up in warm blankets felt so good to them. And it wasn't long. The little one fell sound asleep. And then we talked to the 5-year-old, and so what are you doing here? Why are you sleeping on the porch? Well, my parents chased us. So why did they chase you? Well, because they had given the boy some chores to do, and he didn't get them accomplished. Now, the water had been out in our village for a few weeks, and so there was a problem at the intake, and it wasn't coming down to the taps that were here and there in the village. And so his job was to fill 3 5-gallon buckets with a 3-liter jug that he carried around with him, plus the baby on his back. And so he was the babysitter, and the parents were always in the bar. And so he didn't get his job done, so they chased him. And the village people said, well, this is quite common. We see him sleeping under trees. We see them sleeping at other people's houses. They are chased many times. They give them jobs that's not possible for these kids to fulfill. And so this night they had chosen our porch to sleep on, so we brought him in, and we talked to the parents the next day. I had sent Barasa, the Bible worker, to find the parents, and he couldn't find them. The neighbors said, oh, they're at the bar. So on his way to the bar, they were coming home, and so he found them, and so he brought them to the house, and we talked to them. I talked quite sternly to them, and said, hey, if you do this again, I will report you to the government. And true enough, I reported them to the government because it wasn't long that they were back, and they had remembered the warm blankets. And so they were back, and so, yes. Then apparently after that, they were welcomed back into the house, not locked out of it. And so there's lots of these things that happen. This isn't even in here, but another time there was a little girl. I thought something caught my eye near our fence, and there was a little girl. Now, when it's cold at night and you're just standing there huddled in the brush and the little bushes that were growing against the fence, she was soaking wet from urine, and so I'm sure frozen, and she was just huddled there. And so I went out, found her, and rinsed her off and brought her in, wrapped her in blankets, and talked to her and tried to find out why she was there. So her job as well was to babysit her siblings. And she's just a little girl, and she's got 2 siblings that she is looking after all the time. And so she ran away, and she came to my house. And so, but I didn't know it. It was at night she came. And so there she is outside all night, frozen. And so, come to find out, one time the mother had taken her feet and put them over a fire and said, "You won't run away again." And so this time when the mother came and got her, she had burnt her. She had taken a stick and burnt her. Where was it? Yes, it was on her head, and so we put bandages on her. Oh, and on her chest right here too. She had taken a stick out of the fire, put it on her head, and put it on her chest. And so we bandaged, cleaned those up, bandaged them, and then called for the mother. And we went to the government office as well, because this kid was not only afraid to go home, she was seriously abused. And so the mother promised she would never do anything like that again. This child already had, as a baby, fallen out of, this is the story, fallen out of the shitenge as the mother was cooking, fallen out. The back of her head was all a scar, and hair didn't grow on part of her head already because she had fallen into the fire and her head was severely burnt. So you think that this is not the first time things happen like that to them, and so you take every precaution that this won't happen again. And so we worked with the parents and the government, and you know, in order to stay out of jail, these parents have to comply. And once the people know, people watch. And so I never seen her with any other wounds, or she never came back to my house. But when the mother finally did come to get her and take her home a couple days later, it was a sad, very sad situation. The little girl just screamed and hollered, no, no, no. She didn't want to go. She grabbed the bumper of my car and was hanging on for dear life, and the mother had to just literally rip her off the bumper. It was, home was not heaven. Home was hell. She didn't want to go back. And so hopefully life was a little bit better after that. I don't know. But apparently she calmed down as soon as she was out of the yard and knew that she was going home. So we had, one day I was sitting beside the well and with a bunch of kids, and we were just kind of talking because they speak Swahili and I don't. And so anyway, with a few words here and there and gestures, you learn how to communicate without even the language. And so I was talking with this little boy whose name was Alex. And beautiful smile, just a nice little boy, probably maybe around 12 years old, maybe not, and maybe a little younger. But anyway, I noticed his leg was full of sores, and I mean big sores, open sores, and a swollen leg. And is running pus out. And I said, I pointed over to it, and how long have you had that? Long time. So, okay. So then I get my translator and I find out the story. The story is Alex was out playing with a bunch of kids near some village huts, and a lady came back and somebody had stolen her food, her beans that she was going to eat. This lady was drunk. She caught Alex outside playing with the other kids, and she beat him. She beat him, and she broke his leg. He spent a month and a half in a hospital, apparently, at the time. And with a broken leg and multiple wounds. And so then... But this never healed. Now, this is over a year or so later that I meet him at the well, and there's still pus dripping from his leg. And so apparently there's always pus dripping from his leg. So I start doing charcoal poultices on him and hot and cold and different treatments, trying to heal this leg and close up all these wounds, but nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. So I go to the village clinic and we get some antibiotics and nothing is happening. So I bring him to the hospital. The hospital says, maybe this is in the bone. And if it's in the bone, we have to scrape the bone and everything else. I said, okay, thank you. So I went back and I got the mother and I went back to the hospital 2 days later with Alex and the mother. And so with the doctor there who could explain to the mother exactly what he thought, they took an x-ray of his legs and showed, yes, the infection is in the bone, that this could spread throughout his body and he could become a cripple or even die from it. And so in time, if it never heals and nothing is ever done for it. And so he says, Alex needs an operation. The mother says, no, I am working. She works at the bar. Her and her husband have a bar. They're never home. And I don't have time because over there you have to go, you have to cook, you have to look after them in the hospital. You just don't drop them off at the hospital and pick them up again. No, or visit them. You have to stay with them and make sure their every need is cared for. Like if they have to go to the bathroom, if they need certain things, they have to have a caregiver at the hospital. And that's how they get the food too. You got to buy the food and care for them. And so I said, yes, Alex needs an operation and he's going to get it. She said, no. I said, yes, he is. And so with the doctor there translating and everything else, she was determined no, but I was determined yes. And with the doctor, he made all the arrangements. I brought Alex back. Alex had his operation. The mother came to her senses, went, looked after her son. I paid for the hospital bill. She would be his caregiver, and she would look after his food and everything. So that was good. But this is an operation that usually one time doesn't do it. So the next year, Alex needs another operation because this is still not healing. So they open up his leg, they scrape the bone, and they close it up. And so this had to happen 3 times. And 3 times I had to fight with the mother to send her son to the hospital to get these operations so that healing can occur. And Alex did heal up nicely, and I'm so thankful for that. And then one time my grandson came with me. His name is Caleb, and we were in the village around the little duka, which is the little store, which is about, about that big, not very big. And they have all your necessities. It's your Walmart. They have your matches, your sugar, your salt, your soap, your kerosene, your cement, your whatever you need. They've got it in that little hut. And so we were there at the duka, and so Alex said, Caleb said, "Mamère," which means grandmother in English. "Mamère, you should see that boy's neck. It is so bad. You have to do something." So I said, "Well, which boy? Show me the boy." So we went back and we looked for the boy because we weren't together at the same place. And then so he finds the boy and he brings him over to me, and look at that. And so on the boy's neck, he had a terrible abscess. And it was about this big, all crusty and infected and swollen, so I asked him if he could move his neck. He couldn't move his neck. He moved his whole body. It was just so swollen, the whole neck. And so I said, "Come with us." And so he came with us. These kids just obey. They just come. Not when they're being bad, but when they're when they're in trouble, they just obey. And so he came to my house, and we soaked it and did hot and cold fomentations on it. And so we got all that crusty stuff off, and then I just put some pressure on it, and it just poured out pus and poured out pus. It's just like half a cup of pus came out of that thing. It was amazing. And when we were done, he could turn his neck. And I was so glad. Because, this is pretty close to the brain. This is a nice little kid. Matter of fact, he's Alex's younger brother. And so we did charcoal poultice on it, and we put a mattress on the floor for him to sleep that night. And, he didn't say, "Well, I have to tell my dad, or my mom." No, just goes to bed, sleeps all night. In the morning, we do the same thing. We clean it up. We change the poultices. He's there playing around all day. And goes to bed again. And the next night I thought, well, I should find out and let the parents know that where he is, And so I went to the little duka, found out the phone number of the father. Everybody has a cell phone, even in Africa. And so I find out the number, and I call him. And I am able to tell him that I have his son. He's staying at my house. He said, "Oh, I figured." And so that was it. And thank you very much. Okay, they're very polite. Thank you very much. Appreciate all you're doing. So that day, I brought him to the clinic and got him some antibiotics because I was leaving. and for a few weeks, and I got him some antibiotics and everything else, and I bring him home. Hey, I just live like a short ways from his house, walking distance, short walking distance. And so I find the mother and I say this: morning, night, morning, night, 1, 1. So 1 tablet in the morning, 1 tablet at night. So, okay, no problem. So I will do it. So I go away. I come back after a couple weeks. And after a few days, I see this little guy. And there he is, all crusted over, looking just like he did when I first found him. Did you take the medicine? Did your mom give you medicine? No. Okay. So start all over again, the whole process, clean him up, get it all down, heal, so that it can heal and everything. It's just the way it is, life, the way it is there. Life is cheap. There's always another baby, and yes, by this time the mother did have another baby there, and so this little guy they're pretty well on their own when they're very small. And so anyway, he finally healed, and he did well. So I have one more story that I'm going to tell you. This is about Lucy. Lucy was the second wife. She was a young girl, and she had gotten pregnant by this man in the village. He was a big man, owned a bar, and everybody owns a bar. Every evening, everybody is drunk in these villages. I'm sorry to say, that's just how life is. If you didn't own a respectable business like the Duca guy, look after his family, nice, clean, everything. It's not everybody who does that. And so this man took Lucy as his wife, separated her from his wife and everything he owned, put her in this little shack out back, and that's where she was to live. He really had nothing to do with her unless he wanted to play around. And so other than that, she had her baby, and now he was 5 years old. And so he wouldn't give anything to Lucy. He wouldn't help her. And Lucy got sick, and so he thought, okay, she has AIDS. So he had absolutely nothing to do with her, wouldn't give her food, wouldn't give her anything. And so she would send her son and his son to him and beg for soap or beg for food or something like that so that they could eat. She was a very nice young lady, and so trying to do her best for her son, but he kept the son away from her as much as he could. But she longed for her son because she had nothing. There she was in this little shack, just there and sick. And so one day she shows up at my door. She has a problem and she needs help really bad. And so I bring her to the hospital and we get her checked over, and Lucy has like rectal cancer. And so she needs an operation, and okay, so I pay for her operation, her hospital, everything, and then she goes back home. And the husband won't have anything to do with her or help her because he thinks she has AIDS. I am not going near her, okay? Though Well, anyway. And so, Lucy, so with Lucy's operation, Lucy needed a colostomy and everything else. So she had a bag. And so every month she had to change her bag. Well, she had to empty her bag every day, but every month she had to put on a new bag. And so this was costing. And so, again, this husband was not going to help her. And so when I sent her to the hospital for her operation, I decided the husband was not going to have anything to do with her. Now, the husband had gotten her pregnant, destroyed her life, kept her in a shack, and I decided he's going to pay something for this and not just be able to walk away from this. And so I went to the government, and the government made him pay for a caregiver for the hospital to do her food and everything else. And he's a really big guy and was no, right up until he had to go to the courts, and then he said yes, because they were going to put him in jail. And so so I paid the hospital and for her bags and stuff like that. But and then she decided, okay, I'm done. I'm going to move out. I'm going to build my own little house. And so she did. She made all the mud bricks and built this small house for herself and thatched it. And she did really well on her own because she could have her own little garden and everything else. And she wasn't bothered by anybody, and she was having her own life. She was feeling good. And she lived about 3 years doing good. And then she came to me again, and she said, I need to go to a hospital. I need to have another operation. And so I said, what's going on? She said, oh, it's all back there again. And so I checked her, and sure enough, it's like, yeah, she's a mess. She's just full of cancer. And so this time I said, Lucy, no, I can't help you this time. I said, you need to get close to God. And so wasn't but a few months, couple months later, Lucy had died. And so I went to pick her up at the hospital, to pick up her body at the hospital. And so I was going to drive Lucy down to where Lucy lived, where she built her house, which was not far from my house. But when I came back, there was somebody at the corner of our road and just pointing that way towards his house. So he knew his wife had died, and Lucy had died, and so he decided, okay, it wouldn't look good if I didn't bury her. So he had people pointing me to his house along the road. And so when I got past the little road to go to where his house was, he said, I will take her body and I will bury her. And so I said, okay. And so he took her and buried her, and her friends were there. I mean, so now he had an image to keep up. And so she was not going to cost them anything anymore. And so she died. So Lucy lived a horrid life as a young girl. And this happens to a lot of young girls over there. And so actually, the husband, I needed timber, lumber for my industrial school. And the only one having lumber in our village at that time was her husband. And so I went over there and I talked to him and I said, I need timber. And he said, you know, he gave me the prices and everything else. And so pretty soon I made a deal with him on timber and everything. And actually, we did business several times. He became a nicer guy, much nicer, and not so stubborn and, you know, dogmatic. And so, but I want to say, you know, there's a little bit you can do, and then, you know, you can go to the government office, you can complain, and you can help these people to a certain extent. But sometimes you wonder how much you're going to push your way into the lives of these families. And then I decided, well, I have to push my way until it becomes, until they realize that they have to look after their children, to do all that I can for them, and that's all I can do. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed that.
Well, no, it's 10 to.